that work? Oh yeah, it's working. Okay, great. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here on Trauma Training Tuesday. So excited to have you here. It's just great to see so many friends and so many people that care about this issue. We were kind of talking beforehand about the sort of the climate in the world is making it hard to talk about really important, really impactful things. We're just so grateful to have a space to talk about it. I've said this to lots of people in my life that talking about racism as trauma makes a lot of sense, right? It is trauma. And we know that we're in a climate where we're not really allowed to just straight up talk about racism these days. So the hope is that being able to talk about it as trauma is going to help us make sense, help us have a way forward. I am so thrilled and delighted to introduce Dr. Nadia Ward. She's at the Mosakowski Institute at Clark University. And before coming to Clark University, she was at Yale for like 25 years, right? Something like that. So she is no joke with her academic cred, and we're so grateful that she's here in Worcester and she's doing this work. And I'm also super grateful that there are so many people in our audience that I like really wanted to be here because I know they care as deeply about this topic as we do. So Carmen, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll let you jump right on in and then I'll turn it on over to Dr. Ward if there's nothing else beforehand. Go ahead, Carmen. We cannot hear you. I can see it. There you go.
I just wanted to say hi to everybody.
Glad you're here. Carmen. Thank you. All right, Dr. Ward, I think I can spotlight you. How about that? Oh, look at that.
Okay, I don't know what all that means. Well, I just want to thank Amy and Kelsey for inviting me to today's conversation. I really appreciate it. And although I'm going to talk about some work that we have been engaged here at the Institute for a couple of years, know that I am eagerly anticipating a dialogue and a conversation about this topic. And knowing that even though I am sharing, I am absolutely eager to learn and to be present and to listen to what folks have to share about this topic. Let me just begin by saying a little bit about, the Institute and what it is and what I do there. The Mosakowski Institute for Public Enterprise actually has been at Clark University for about 15 years now. And when I came on board in 2019, we reimagined the focus of the Institute to really think deeply about how do you create behavioral health interventions that leverage technology to support young people, adolescents, and young adults. We care about all young people. We care about how they identify. But we also know that young men of color in particular in this society have been disenfranchised in many ways. And so we have a particular interest in thinking about how to support the behavioral health and mental health needs of young men of color. And so let me just say, I've been engaged in this work as a clinical and community psychologist for going on 3 decades now. And prior to coming to Clark, and since I've been here at Clark, I am continually thinking about the ways in which race and the cultural and contextual factors that surround the healthy development of young people and young people of color in educational and community settings. And so I'm also an applied psychologist. So for me, the lens through which I think about this work is not necessarily solely about admiring the problem. I'm all about like, what's the thing that we're going to do? Or what are the things that we need to do from a systems perspective, from a program perspective? How do we measure outcomes that make a difference and impact the lives of the people that we serve? And so what you're going to hear today is a little bit about our approach to this work. I will also say that I am a mom of a Black man, And I just want to say that he is celebrating his 27th year of life and living and thriving. And for those of you who are parents and moms of Black men, you know that is no small thing, right? Like that's a big deal. And so I come at the work not just from the perspective of being a psychologist, but from a perspective of being a mom. And I was a single mom, all of his young adult childhood and young adult life. And so I want to actually begin this conversation with sharing a little bit about how this topic has specifically impacted me and the work that we do here at the Institute and the lens through which we do it. So I remember when Amy had mentioned that I was at Yale prior to coming to Clark, and I was. And when I came in 2019 to Clark, I was super excited about reimagining the work to focus on the behavioral health needs of young people, leveraging technology, but also trying to address important social issues and thinking about young men of color in particular, right? And the focus on young men of color at the Institute was actually driven by the Board of Trustees here. And I will share with you all that I had this conversation when I was being interviewed by the president of the university at the time. His name was David Angel. And he said to me, he said, Nadia, I and our trustees are really concerned about the way in which Black men are treated in society. And we want our institute to do something about that. Now, David Angel, for those of you that don't know him, was a white dude from the UK, right? Tall, slender. And so for me, being a Black woman and an academic and a single mom and all of that, I wanted to fall out of my chair. Like I could not believe I was having a conversation with somebody who got it. And I was like, I'm signing my name on the dotted line. I'm coming here, I'm doing this work because folks here get it, right? They want to do something about this issue. And so that kind of brought me to Clark. When I got here, it couldn't have been more than 2 months before I get the call. In this instance, it was actually an email message that every mother dreads, especially a Black mother who gets the call about their son being in danger, right? And so I will never forget, it was a September early morning where I had just come in from my walk. I had just started my work here at Clark. My son is an undergraduate student in a school in Kansas City, Missouri, a little town called Liberty, Missouri, William Jewell College, kind of like Clark, small PWI, maybe 1,000 kids on campus. And I look at my phone and I get this message from him saying, briefly, Mom, last night I was jumped by 6 white men at a bar. They stole my wallet and they stole my phone. And that was it. That was the call. And so I immediately panic. He's 1,400 miles away from me and have no way to contact him, right? Because the message came from an iPad that apparently he probably borrowed from somebody else. So what do? I immediately call security at the school. I had unfortunately awakened the security guard who was on duty at the time because it was about 8 o'clock in the morning their time, and they were completely of no help, right? They didn't know where he was, where his dorm was. There was no reporting of an incident the night before, all of this. And I had completely lost all of my composure, like all of it. And so after giving a description of my son, where he was dormed at the school, what had happened in terms of this message that I received, they say, we'll call you back, right? But they didn't ask for my number or my contact information. So then I'm more angry. And so I give them that. I hang up the phone from them. I call my brother, who fortunately also lived in Kansas City, and I say to him, this is what happened last night. He said, hang up the phone, I'm going to call you back. 25 minutes later, he calls me back. He's in a conference room at his job, my son in tow, and I literally get to physically hear from him on the call, right? I don't see him, but I can hear him. And he's like, Mom, I'm okay. I'm fine. But this is what happened. So he proceeds to tell me my son was also a basketball player at the time on the team, that he and friends had gone downtown to a bar. He was 21 of age, and he was sitting with a buddy of his from the team. And this white gentleman, middle-aged gentleman, instigates kind of a communication and hits his friend Nick purposefully. That turned into an altercation that moved outside, bouncers involved, fight happens, this whole thing with these 6 men. And there's only 2, my son and another friend, who are engaged in this incident. So I say to Chandler, his name is Chandler, I say to my son, did you call the police? And he looks at me and like, I could hear in his voice, like, are you crazy? Like, no, of course I didn't call the police. He's like, Mom, like that would have made the situation even worse. I might not even be here to talk to you if I had done that. So then I say to him, okay, did you tell your coach? No, Mom, like I'm not telling the coach, because really we shouldn't have, all of us that went down there, we shouldn't have been down there anyway. So I'm not telling him, and I'm not trying to get any of us in trouble. Chandler, okay, you hear I'm doing this as a mom. You need to go see somebody at the counseling center. Like, you got to go talk to somebody. Mom, I'm not doing that either. Like, there's nobody at the counseling center that can appreciate what it means to be Black and my experience, like, in that situation. And all the women there, they're all white women, and they're not much older than me. They don't get me. I'm not saying anything about that. Chandler, I'm calling the president. Like, this is ridiculous. This can't happen. Mom, no, you're not. You're not going to do, Mom. And with firm resolution, he says to me, I have work to do. I'm putting this behind me. I'm going to move forward. And that was it. It was like no more conversation after that. Now, fortunately, right, I have a sibling. My oldest brother is there. And as a psychologist, I've got a network of colleagues that I have deliberately placed in Chandler's life along his life. So he can call his Uncle Derek, who's also a Black man licensed psychologist, who he can speak to, right? So there was an intentional kind of developing the village around him as he was growing up. But there's so many more young men out there that don't have that level of support, right? And what was certainly ironic was here I was at Clark in charge of this institute that was charged to do this work with young men of color, and my son literally tying my hand saying, you're not going to do anything. Like, I've got this figured out for myself. Like, this is what I have to do, right? And so that's the backdrop that I want to share with you as a parent, and the lens through which sometimes I'm thinking about this work and what might be possible solutions that we need to engage in to support our young men. I will also share that some of the work that I'm currently engaged in Philadelphia, who people on the call may know, has historically for the last 10 years or so have been struggling with increased violence in communities, especially in the North Side, where young men of color have been impacted by kind of rates of violence, homicide, firearms, etc., right? And so this is a conversation that I've engaged with other colleagues in that city, where we're thinking about a public health model to begin to address some of these needs. I will touch upon that later in the conversation that we're having. So if you can imagine, kind of, this is not the only incident that I've had with my son. There have been others. And I've also been fortunate enough to be able to have critical conversations with other moms who similarly struggle with the fear of what it means to raise a Black male child in a society that absolutely loathes them, right? The thing that you love most in the world is the thing that society actually loathes. And so the struggle, the tension that comes with trying to raise a child in a world that despises them, but still wanting to instill in them hope and a sense of a future orientation and opportunity and all of that is a real dissonance cognitively for those of us who are embroiled in this work, right? And so part of what I hope to talk about in the time that we have together is exploring the experience, and in this particular case that I'm sharing, would be of collegiate Black males that are emerging adults, right? So these are college students on a PWI campus who have a very unique educational experience. And then what does it mean to be young and Black and male in this space, and the microaggressions that they experience on a regular basis, and how to deal with that, right? We're also going to discuss the implications of racial trauma on the mental health and well-being of young men of color. I'm going to talk about a model that we used in this work, but also more importantly, focus on the health prevention and promotion strategies that we used here at the Institute that I think has gained some traction that young men have found to be particularly helpful to them. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about statistics that I know folks on this call are aware of. But just to highlight, we know that for young men of color in this country, that police use of force is among the leading cause of death. So the CDC puts out statistics and data all the time that highlights a couple of key things for us in this conversation. One, homicide is the leading cause of death for Black, non-Hispanic young men between the ages of 1 and 19 and 20 to 44 in the US. Unintentional injuries is the second leading cause of death for Black young men, the same age group. And that we know that Black men and boys in the US are 2.5 times more likely than white young men to die during an encounter with police. And there's data and research to suggest that even a young person's early interaction with police can set them on a trajectory of having mental health challenges along their educational and career journey. The problem with all of that is that among this population, young men of color, they are more likely to experience depression and anxiety each year, but of this demographic, they're the least likely to ask or seek for help, right? We know that Black teens are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. We know that young men of color in the juvenile justice system are more likely to be diagnosed with a psychiatric or substance use disorder. And we know that Black youth in this country, 77% of them essentially have unmet mental health needs. And so when you consider the experiences, the racial traumas that they are experiencing, it absolutely impacts their physical and psychological health and well-being, right? So as we think about a definition for racial trauma, I want to offer the one that I have highlighted here. So we describe, when we think about racial trauma, the physical and psychological symptoms that Black people or people of color experience after being exposed to experiences of racism. And that there's signs and symptoms that come along with these racially motivated experiences, right? That being of fear, hypervigilance, depression and anxiety often, anger, frustration, a sense of hypervigilance, a sense of being exhausted and overwhelmed oftentimes. And we know that as a result of racial trauma, that has been a contributing factor to the increase of depression and anxiety that young Black men in this demographic often experience. And then we know that, when we think about racial trauma, that it also has a significant connection to toxic stress. And toxic stress, as we know, is this prolonged activation of the body's stress response system. And when your body's stress response system is activated in this way for a prolonged amount of time, that it has implications for one's normal development, right? So young people who are constantly feeling like they're in a state of hypervigilance often have difficulty in school. They have difficulty remembering things. They have difficulty following through with assignments, right? And so we know that there are medical and emotional complications that come with this prolonged exposure to stress. So that leads us to the work that we did here at the Institute. Now, this, if you can imagine, came on the heels of, we did this study in 2022, 2023, the initial study. And at the time, we were all reeling about the death of George Floyd, where he was publicly murdered online. The whole world saw it. And in the course of those conversations and all of the other um, challenges that this country had experienced with lethal policing among racial and ethnic minority communities with Black young people, um, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, et cetera, so on. We have them listed there on the slide. That I started thinking about, I said, damn, like, what must it feel like for my son to grow up in a society where, being young and Black and male, every day when you walk out the door, can feel like a burden. And to know that your physical and psychological health and well-being is often at stake, no matter what you do. And so we were developing a podcast at the Institute at the time. And we had invited a gentleman by the name of Dr. Brett Rayford, who's an African American clinical psychologist, to join me in this conversation to kind of explore kind of what, like, how are young Black men feeling right now in this country, given that they are witnessing and being re-traumatized through social media, kind of constantly observing and witnessing, you know, Black and brown bodies that look like theirs, being brutalized and what have you. So he said yes, he would do this podcast with me. But I said to him, I said, Brett, I don't feel comfortable doing this without actually having a conversation with young Black men to hear their voice and to hear them talk about what this feels like for them. Like, I feel like we can't talk about it without including youth voice in this. And so we said, absolutely, we would do this. And so we basically kind of identified our theoretical frame. A renowned psychologist, Robert Carter, counseling psychologist, talked about kind of race-based trauma and what that means in terms of emotional and psychological injury, and the ways in which people respond to race-based trauma through hypervigilance and avoidance and all the rest. So what we did was we identified 7 young men of color, emerging adults, who are all attending university at different parts of the country. Some of these young men one was in Florida, one was in Louisiana, one was in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So they didn't all come from, Massachusetts. And they were about ages 21, 21 years of age. They were agreeable to participate in this focus group to engage in this critical conversation about what does it feel to be young, Black, and male in the world today, in this society. And so there were some key questions that we asked of them, primarily being, was it like to be young, Black, and male in America today? How have you managed interactions with law enforcement? What are the socializing messages you receive from your parents to help you cope or manage these daily stressors? And how does being a young man of color in the US today affect your outlook on your future orientation? And so what I want to share with you is excerpts and themes that came out of that conversation. And what I'm hoping, my technology is going to work, you're actually going to hear the voices of the young men who participated in this. And so their response to what it was like to being a Black man in America now, they talked about this theme of living in a constant state of hypervigilance.
You don't have to go to those places anymore to see police brutality. Nowadays, it's right in your face. In 2015, I lost one of my closest friends to brutality, and he lived blocks away from me. So like nowadays, you don't have to go over there to see it. It's literally down the street now. He was a college student just like us. Well, some of us in this chat, and he came back home from college, and he didn't even have a parking ticket. He did everything correct. He worked at the bank, but even him, that couldn't protect him. He still was shot and killed by the police.
And so that was one of the focus group members talking about a real life example or experience that he had with the loss of a friend who was innocently kind of murdered by police. Another question we had was, what were the socializing, like, what did your parents tell you? How did they help you navigate what it means to be in these situations when they can't be with you? And here's what they said.
That's just something they instill with us as we growing up, that you kind of build like a wall. If some things aren't fair, you just have to be respectful, maybe be inferior for that moment.
That was another young man who talked about that parental socialization was a means of protection and survival, that for him, it's like you almost have to emasculate yourself in the moment and just kind of get through it so that you can stay alive. Another young man said, these are just the guidelines that my parents, instilled in me. So if I ever get pulled over, and I have before, this is what you have to do to stay alive. My mother showed me the reality of what the work really is. You kind of develop those mental strategies for when you encounter police or any other white person for that matter. Here's another one. What's it like to be stopped and frisked by police?
Dehumanizing. And then they don't value my life, my body, my time, and they're taking my time away from my life for something arbitrary.
Right. So this idea of being dehumanized in their interaction with the police. Another young man says, it's like hell on earth because I don't feel like I'm free at any point in time. I just felt dehumanized, and felt like as a man, I had no autonomy over my own body. And not only that, but then my mom had to see that. So this young man recounted a story of being racially profiled and dehumanized by the police, with his mother observing the way in which the police were kind of physically touching him in a dehumanizing way. And then, you all may be familiar with this quote from James Baldwin, where he says, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And so the facilitator asked the young men to respond to, how do you feel about that? And they talked about understanding that the underpinning of rage is actually fear. Here's another audio clip.
We always walk around every single day with that truth in our minds and our hearts and deep within our spirits from the day that we're born. That's something that we're overcompensating for every single day, trying to be more masculine, trying to be smarter, trying to be faster, trying to be stronger, trying to be better men, rather than having the opportunity to just be ourselves.
Absolutely. Another young man says, anger usually has an underlying connotation that you're afraid. And as a Black man, I think a lot of us cover up our fear with that anger. We're fearful that we can be taken away from our families at any moment. We're fearful that we can be locked up even if we didn't do the crime. We're fearful that history will repeat itself and we may be a part of those hundreds of millions of bodies that were murdered. And then finally, how does being a young man of color in the US affect your outlook on your future orientation? So this notion of, is there an installation of hope around future orientation? Here's what they say.
It's more than just me. As much as it sucks, I have to endure that pain and go through it because I know there's a greater good, and I'm paving the way for the next, Black person in line that, wants to go towards that, wants to be a bio major or, anything in STEM.
I think for me, listening to the transcripts that they shared, I was absolutely blown away by their feeling like, this isn't about me. There's a bigger issue to be addressed here. And I need to endure for the person coming behind me, right? Another young man says, I just think that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. But I think it's something that we can use as motivation, though. We were able to overcome so many years of slavery. We overcame Jim Crow and now BLM, Black Lives Matter. Maybe there's hope for a better tomorrow as long as we continue to do our part. And then finally, a young man said, I know it's been denied to us for the whole existence of this country, but I do like the idea of life liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The connotation being, though, I know that's not afforded to me, but I like the idea of it. I'm still bought into the idea of that being a possibility. And then finally, in terms of what it means for them to be a young man of color, how does that affect their outlook on their future orientation? They talk about the power of forgiveness.
I think forgiveness is a powerful thing to have because you can let go of that energy that may be consuming you, whether it's hate or bitterness, whatever that is.
So he says, I'm not going to let hate consume me. And another young man says, I don't want to be hateful. There are still people that are not going to be receptive to that love. So I still need to keep my guard up, even when I feel like I'm trying to open up my heart and open up my arms to be loving. And another young man says, I think that W.B. Du Bois said something like, the beautiful spirituality that we as Black people in America have, even though we had so little, from the scraps that America continues to give us, but to come up with this idea of a spiritual awakening to treat you as another human being. The idea being like, he's hopeful about the opportunity or the possibility to be treated as an equal, as a human being.
Excuse me, Dr. Ward.
Yes, please.
Now that you finished the audio bites, I was wondering if you can look on the bottom and switch it over to slideshow view from the presenter mode.
Oh, so you all are not seeing,
We are seeing. We're
you're
just seeing.
seeing two sets of notes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try to stop sharing and do that
Oh,
differently.
amazing. Don't worry too much about it, but it'll be easier to see the slide in the show view. Thank you.
Okay, so let's see how I do this better or differently.
It's at the top of the toolbar. It should just say I think it says view, and then you can go to slide show view.
Hold on.
Resume slideshow. That should work.
What when you all see now, can you see?
No, it's still in it's in slide sorter view now.
No, we don't want that either. I apologize, everybody.
It's not the biggest problem anybody here has had. Let me just tell you.
Okay, wait.
I think it's in the view. I think it's in the view menu.
In the view menu, I'm looking at slideshow. I'm clicking it and it's not
See the
clicking.
top toolbar that's where you're on the home, and then there's insert design. I think if you go either to slideshow or to view, that should work. Slideshow might work.
Or if you go, I'm sorry, I do PowerPoints. Oh, yeah, there we go.
It's gonna start, yeah, from current slide would be better, but from beginning would work too.
Okay, let's do from current slide. So I'm clicking that and I'm getting nothing.
Well then, I
You-
guess we have a different problem.
Can you
Hold on.
click you see where the save document above file, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth item. Can you click that? It would start from the beginning, but you can move to the slide. You see it go above file.
Hold on, let me see. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Got
Is that
it.
what you want?
Yep.
Right.
That's what you want. Okay,
Yes, thank you.
absolutely. I so apologize for that.
No worries at all.
Okay. So we just finished up the audio clips from hearing what the young people have shared. So here are the 5 themes that came out of that conversation that so moved us in our thinking about, after all of the years that we continue as a people to deal with our interactions with police, that young men still are living in this constant state of hypervigilance, feeling that their bodies are they're being racially profiled and experiencing these dehumanizing experiences with the police, that really nothing has changed in that. But even though they've had those disheartening and painfully racial trauma kinds of experiences, they still have this great capacity for hope and for forgiveness and for love, which is a thing that you know, moved me for sure. So then we began to think about, after that experience, these young men, interestingly, said this conversation, this hour conversation, was so critically important to them that they wanted to continue to have the conversation, interestingly enough. And so we said, okay, you know, if Dr. Rayford is open to it, like, do it. And so they proceeded to continue to meet for 10 weeks, every other week, for an entire semester, to continue to have this conversation with each other. So there was some bonding that happened. Now, I need you all to appreciate, we're in the middle of COVID right now. Universities are closed spaces, even though young people are back on campus. And so the fact that they still wanted to do this virtual experience was a testament to not only their commitment to each other, but clearly they were getting something out of the opportunity to connect with one another and to have sacred space to talk about their lived experience every day, right? And so they did this for 10 weeks. They established something called, they called themselves the King's Council, which I love that. And then they said to me after the end of the 10 weeks, they said, Dr. Ward, we want to get together. Like, we want to come together, as I said, from different parts of the country and physically be in space with one another. And we want to come to Clark. And I was like, y'all are trying to get me fired. Like, you can't come to Clark because the university is closed. Like, it's COVID. Like, we can't do that. So they said, well, we got to figure something out because we want to do this together. And so what we did was we essentially created an opportunity for them to come here. We rented an Airbnb. We made sure everybody, you know, was vaccinated and COVID up, you know, they had all of that taken care of. They brought masks and hands, like all of that stuff. But they absolutely did spend 4 days together at a beautiful space in Massachusetts, where they began to talk more in depth about what their needs were and ways in which they wanted to support each other around their mental health and well-being, right? So it was a 4-day retreat, and the goal was for them to connect, support, and to heal. And they engaged in various activities to actually do that, to offer opportunity for them to bond, to reflect, and to think about their personal growth and development in intentional ways. Here are the topics that they decided that they wanted to focus on and talk about. So racial trauma and psychological health, physical safety, manhood and masculinity, interpersonal relationships, nutrition, health, human performance, financial literacy, business and entrepreneurship, and spirituality, okay? So in addition to having these conversations, they also were engaged in a number of kind of activities to also promote this sense of belonging. So they did some, and I'll show you some pictures. So they did some outdoor recreational things. They went kayaking, right? They went hiking, right? They're journaling. They're making meals together, breaking bread together, and going through that whole process of figuring out who's cooking what, who's setting the table, da 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 da, and then sitting around a table and having, you know, just wonderful, critical conversation. So here's some pictures of them doing that. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's Dr. Rayford right there, the psychologist who was doing this work with them, with the young men, and the gentleman who stayed on for the 10 weeks after to facilitate that. So they had a wonderful 4-day experience. They came back feeling transformed. And then they said to me, Dr. Ward, we want to do this every year. What? We don't need money for, like, what are you talking about? Like, who has money for all that? But, you know, I said, but is that not what I'm here to do? Like, this is a thing that we need to do for these young men, to create sacred space for them. So in talking to them about their experiences, what happened over the course of the 10 weeks, what happened at the retreat, they gave me a model of how to actually deal with racial trauma that I think is pretty instructive, and I think it'd be helpful in this conversation that we're having this afternoon. And they basically told me 5 things. There's 4 here on this slide, but they told me 5 things. They said, number 1, when we think about our mental health and well-being, here's what we need from you. And I say this because you all know there's all sorts of people writing blogs, social media, articles, what have you, dictating what we should be doing to them. But rarely do we see where folks are saying, we actually asked young men of color, what do they need and how can we be helpful to them? So this is part of what I loved about this experience, where they actually had the chance to tell me, don't tell us what you want us to have or what you feel like we need to be doing. We want to tell you. And so they told me 5 things. They said, number 1, don't lie to us. And I'm like, what? Don't lie to us. Don't sit here and tell us and gaslight us about what's really happening in this country. We have phones that give us all of the information that we can and want to be exposed to that tells us what's happening in the world, right? Don't gaslight us. Tell us the truth about what's happening and be honest and say, we don't have the answers. As adults, as the people who are given the responsibility to shepherd, nurture, care for them, protect, support them, that sometimes we don't have the answers. So tell the truth. Don't lie to us. Number 2, I'll forward this for you. These are the 4 areas that they came up with. They said, we want community. We want a safe space where we can be together, we can be vulnerable, we can create a shared perspective and a brotherhood that actually sustains us through turbulent times, right? We want to have a voice. We want it to be okay for us to be emotional, for us to be vulnerable and to talk about our feelings without feeling like we have to be judged. They also said that we want to be able to develop our own sense of a positive identity, right? That, who we are as Black men is important. And we want to have pride in who we are and where we come from. And we want to actually be shored up in a way that we can actually challenge the social norms about how society views and sees us. And then they, interestingly said something about relationships, intergenerational relationships. They said, you all think we don't like old people, right? I am an old person as far as they're concerned. I don't think of myself as an old person, but right? So they said, you all actually think we don't want us to actually spend time with old people or people who've had much more lived experience. He said, but actually, they said, actually, that's not true. We believe that you all have, just important lived experiences that we want you to share with us to help us navigate the potholes of our lives, right? Maybe through your sharing with us, we can avoid some of the pitfalls that perhaps you have gone through, but kind of giving us a roadmap and ways to kind of think differently about what it is that we're experiencing is actually really important to us. So we want you to spend time with us. We want you to share your stories with us, and we want to grow and develop from hearing those stories. Share your wisdom and model for us, right? What you think is important for us to know as we live this life. And then finally, they said, we actually want new pathways towards thinking about our healing. We don't want to be a diagnosis. I'm going to say that again. We're not a diagnosis, right? We want to be kind of experiencing new pathways towards what healing looks like for us. And so, yes, Dr. Ward, we respect the fact that you're a clinical psychologist, right? But that's one way to think about how to engage us around this work. Here's what we really want from you, Dr. Ward. We want you to give us access. We want you to kind of open doors for us so that we can have a different experience in the world, right? And so the extent to which you can pick up the phone, create an exposure experience, stretch me outside of my comfort zone so I'm learning something new and different, like that more than anything is a thing that I want, right? I want to be held accountable, right? I want to feel like I have agency over my life. What I need you to do is to help shepherd me through that. The connections that you have, make them available to me too. Allow me to see you in action so I have a model in my head about what that looks like. And then give me the chance to go do it, right? So spiritual healing, mindfulness, meditation, they want to be a part of all of that. So taking that into account, what we began to think about here at the Institute is this needs to be an annual kind of experience for these young people. Like every year, they should have the opportunity to connect with a Dr. Rayford, create a cohort of young men who want to have these conversations ongoingly. I neglected to mention when they were at the retreat, the 4-day retreat, what we did was identified Black men, professionals, who addressed all of those items that they identified that they wanted to talk about. And we invited them to be in that space, whether that was in person or whether it was virtual. So they got to see men modeling the thing that they were curious about, what they wanted to know and learn more about. And that was instructive on a couple of levels. One, they were able to kind of gather that information and knowledge that they felt like they needed. But two, more importantly, their social network just immediately begins to expand. So beyond the retreat, they still have a relationship with all of those presenters, and understand, they did not want to be paid for their time, which was beautiful in and of itself. That for them, it was about giving back, investing in the next generation, and wanting to make themselves available to these young men beyond that 4-day retreat experience, right? And so as a result of that experience, we said, what are some other ways that we can help them develop their talent, their skill, their coping strategies as they're navigating, different spaces that they find themselves in, whether they be in the community or at university or at home even. And so we created opportunities for them to develop their leadership skills. So they became facilitators of a course we have here at Clark called Difficult Dialogues. And so they themselves learn how to facilitate conversations with their peers and faculty on this topic. How to be an anti-racist, right? How to have difficult conversations about what's happening, in Palestine, et cetera, so on. So putting them in places and spaces where their voice matters, right? Second, many of them were on the men's basketball team. Not many of them, a couple of them were, and they became captains, again, demonstrating leadership ability. Third, we would do these mental health boot camps for the scholar athletes. And I would say to them, we're going to train you on how to facilitate those conversations. So they would do the mental health workshops and the boot camps for their peers. We received a grant to create a mobile application that helps first-year students navigate their college experience. I put them all on the team. We built an app together. They had never had that experience. Some of them, super brilliant, had developed very extensive business plans that they wanted to actually get some traction on. So I said, you know what? We're going to send you to Chicago, and we're going to have you connect with our colleague, Mr. Jenkins, who runs a company called Entrepreneurity, and they're going to teach you how to pitch. So they pitched, and they pitched in front of VCs who, again, became a part of their social network, right? Mentors that are shepherding. And I'm talking about people that are running billion-dollar tech companies that they're now connected to. So powerful opportunities there. And then this presentation that we're talking about as well, I also felt like, yes, we did this work, what have you. We put together this presentation. And often academics, we go to these conferences and we go to these professional meetings where we talk about the work. I said to two of the young men who participated in this work, I said, I'd rather not talk about the findings because this is your life. You've lived this. You need to present the findings of this study, not me. I'll do the backdrop, but in terms of the voice, which is why I wanted you all to hear the audio clips of their voice because it lands differently. I said, I want you to present. And so we took them with us to Belgium. We took them to Belgium, and in front of an audience of 253, 300 people. They got up there and did it. They did the damn thing. It was amazing to see them rise to that occasion. And not only that, but now they were able to make connections with young people like them from all over the world, right? And they still tell me that some of those folks that they met with, they still keep in touch with them. So let me just offer some final thoughts, and I'm really eager to hear what folks on the audience have to say today about this topic and their experiences. But some of the takeaways that I have gleaned in the last couple of years of doing this work with these incredible young men is, number one, we have to create sacred spaces for them where they feel like they belong. They can be their authentic selves, and trusting them that they will be able to connect with their peers in a way that facilitates their own healing, right? Number two, we absolutely have to be intentional about helping them create social networks of support that carry beyond just the experience that they're having in high school, for example, or college, for example. One of the things that I got real clear about, and this speaks to the next 2 points, is as someone who develops programs, implements, and evaluates them with rigor, scientific rigor, one of the things I got real clear about is when I'm developing programs, I have to think about the young person across the developmental lifespan. So, oftentimes we'll think about, oh, we're doing this program because the funding is going to support it for the next 2 years. But no, we actually need to be supporting these young men across important developmental junctures in their lives where they need scaffolding. Just because they graduate from college doesn't mean they're ready to be an adult. And so what are the ways are we thinking about building bridges that scaffold them, right, from one stage of development to another? Third point, we need to understand the difference between coaching, mentoring, sponsoring, and stewardship. They're 4 different things. And these young men need all 4 of those things at different junctures in their life, right? What I love about stewardship is it's this notion that after a young man feels like they have been supported and nurtured in the ways that we have described today, that there is kind of a natural and organic feeling or need to give back. This is stewardship. This idea that, and understand, universities across this country have difficulty getting Black alum to give, right? Since we've been doing this program, the first thing that they do once they get a job, like a real job, is they give the Institute $10, right? And so it might seem like a small amount of money, but it's powerful because they feel like there's something that I got out of here that I want to give back to. That's number one. I want other young people to have the experience that I have, number one. Number two, they do. They come back and they say, Dr. Ward, now I want to be a presenter. I want to share what I've learned, right, with the next cohort of young men coming through. I want to do that. So they regularly come back here every year and participate in activities going on at the Institute. Third, the other thing that I have shared with them that they need to know, I said, your gift, even though you think it's nothing, it puts you on a list in the development office that when the president goes to Chicago to meet with other Clark alum, guess who also gets invited? Now you've got a seat at the table. You get to interact and interface, exchange business cards, ideas with other Clarkies and other influential people where you can shape an agenda, right? So it's not about the money, it's about the opportunity that comes with your giving, right? And so they've figured that part out. They've got that. And so again, as I shared with you, the exposure experiences are critical, right? Having the opportunity for someone to see in them that which they don't see in themselves right now is the key of it, right? And saying to them, I actually see you doing this. So getting them to dream and to reimagine themselves in a world where they think they can impact and powerfully impact that space is the trick of it. Broadening their worldview to say, yeah, being in the United States is challenging as a Black person. as a brown person. But guess what? You've got the whole globe to consider. The whole globe to consider. What we talk to them about is being a citizen of the world, not just thinking myopically about their lived experience in the United States, right? So with that, I am going to stop and say thank you so much for your attention, and I would love to hear you all share your ideas, feedback, experiences in the time that we have remaining. I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay. You all are amazing. I see people sending me hearts. Thank you for sending me hearts, Bill.
I see a question from
Bree.
Mr. Cedric.
Can I hear? Are there questions that folks have? You all
Go
just tell me
ahead,
a little
Cedric.
bit, tell me a little bit about your interest in this topic and the ways in which you were engaged in the work. I would love to hear about that.
Great. Bill
I can
has his
go.
hand up, and I know other people are ready to go too.
Okay, Bill, go ahead. Letitia, I hope you know how to do all this answering questions and things in the
I'll
chat.
help.
Or Amy. Perfect. Okay, you guys got it. Bill, go ahead.
Dr. Ward, I cannot tell you how much you have warmed my heart and made my little tail wag. I've been doing this kind of work ever since I was a freshman at Howard University and was introduced to my first all-Black Boy Scout troop. I'd been in Scouts, for 10 years or so, and it was always white, predominantly white, with a chip every once in a while. And it didn't exist for me, and that opened my eyes when I met this group, and I've been doing the work ever since. I'm actually working for a program now called Love is the Answer that does very similar work. A lot of the things that you outlined about those supports are work that we're trying to do now, and I would love to get a chance to get on, either meet you personally and or get on a Zoom with some of my cohorts and talk about some of the work we're doing and how we might even be able to combine and see about spreading this work.
I love it. I love it. I would love to do that. Where are you located, Bill?
I'm here in Worcester.
You're in Worcester. Fantastic. Right. I'm down the street from you. Come on over.
There you go. All righty.
Yeah. Other hands up.
I
Go
know
ahead,
Cedric. Yeah.
Cedric, please.
Hi. I was wondering, the things that you're doing at Clark, right? When you translate those to like kids that not at Clark that may be the same age, but not academically that level, do you have interactions with those guys? Because a lot of those guys are like the ones I see at the Chinese restaurant or the ones they're around, but they're not where you're at.
Right,
And we're
right.
trying to dig
Absolutely.
into those guys. Like how would,
Yeah, I would love, so to answer your question directly, I absolutely did that work prior to coming to Clark, and so being at Clark is like a convenience sample. The kids came to me, right? And so we were able to do that work. But we also are doing work in other schools, in particular Southbridge right now, where we're absolutely engaged with young men there around these same notions. So Cedric, I will say to you, and so there's some other young men that I encounter on the basketball team who have had difficult life journeys, right? If I could say it that way. And the model still holds. The model still holds. Two things required. One, somebody that truly cares and will spend quality time with them. And two, the exposure experiences are everything, right? And you can think creatively based on what you know about those young people, right? That how you might scaffold them into, as you notice the way that I shared it here, we didn't just, take them all to Belgium the next day, right? Like you kind of build up their confidence and their opportunity to develop those important skills. And with increasing difficulty, right? What's so powerful, Cedric, is they're successful because regardless of how they feel, what they recognize is that Dr. Ward believes in me, so I must be able to do this, right? It's this really interesting kind of social norm thing. What I think she thinks about me is important, right? And so doesn't matter the population, it matters, like I said, those two important things, spending the time with them to get to know them and the exposure experiences. If I had to boil it down, somebody else, just speak to me.
Dr.
I
Ward,
see, yes,
how you doing?
I'm
This
good,
is
Dr. Love,
Dr. Luff in the house.
in
I
the
want to
house.
say, first and foremost, thank you to my friend Amy for putting this on, and my friend Bill for sending out the link. I'm coming to you from San Diego, California,
Nice,
bringing a little West Coast flavor in the house.
nice.
But for the folks in the group, I'm from Worcester. I grew up in Worcester, went to Doherty High School, and Worcester has a near and dear place in my heart. So thank you so much so I know Clark and all that. Thank you so
Yes,
much for your presentation. And what really impressed me was the level of intentionality and the program that you put together. And it's coming from someone who grew up without a father. Mother was a housekeeper and been very vetted to the work as well out here in Cali. I I I can tell you that, especially in the climate that we're in right now, where
yes,
everything is kind of looking like it's going in the other direction.
yes,
I truly believe in the psyche and the psychology of the minds of Black boys. They are yearning to run to something that where they can have that sacred space. In California, I call it healing circles.
yes,
Because
yes,
the challenge, not only for me but for a lot of young men, is 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 dealing with that trauma, childhood trauma, and they're in their 50s and 60s and
yes,
70s and 80s,
yes,
and really have never really had an opportunity to be in a safe place where they can dissect that.
right.
One of the things I was wondering if you've ever thought about in the model that seems to be really successful at Clark is really scaling it from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is we need similar programs in the elementary school district. We need similar programs in the middle school district, similar in the high school district, so that when they come to Clark,
Right.
and then after at Clark, they then could go back and be the ones to start those groups. I wonder if you've thought about, holistically a model that, is possible and sustainable, but starts when they're in elementary school.
Dr. Love, get out of my brain. Okay, you're going in. You're going in. So let's do it.
All right.
So, as a result of this work, I will also share that I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Okay? Now, why is that
on.
important? That's important because, the Divine Nine, this is our charge. This is what we're supposed to do. And so the other kind of like adjacent kind of research interest I have is we got the Divine Nine. We've got folks who's in their charter says we're supposed to be supporting the health, well-being of young people, children, birth through their developmental lifespan. Where are we missing the boat? Right? And so that's one kind of structure that comes out of the community, out of struggle, with a commitment to service and uplifting community, but we're falling short, right? The structure is there, national. There are over 500,000 African-American women that are just deltas, right? So you raise a really important question. And I often think, Dr. Love, that as a society, and I'm not going to blame this on technology, but I'll give you a story. You'll perhaps, many of you on the call will be able to identify this. When I was a young person growing up, my grandfather and grandmother were from Pennsylvania, a little coal mining town called Edenborn near the Mason-Dixon line, right? And like rural country, coal mining. When we would go down there to visit, literally, there was Front Street, Back Street, and Main Street. 3 streets they called them a patch, in the patch. And if Nadia wandered over to Back Street, where I shouldn't have been, Miss Mary called my grandmother, unbeknownst to me, and said, Nadia's over there playing with that little girl that she ain't supposed to be bothered with, right? And then when I get home, I'm thinking I'm slick. I'm in trouble. Now, Dr. Luff, we have air tags that we put on kids in their backpacks. You follow what I'm saying to you? So the role and function of community that sustained us as a people, right? So to your point, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be leveraging the strength of community and natural community leaders to actually do the thing that you're suggesting, to create those opportunities and programs with kids in elementary school, followed up by middle school, high school, because now development, you got to think 40 years of programming. Like 40 years is what it takes, right? And so in this climate, that ain't coming from the federal government. So in some ways, it forces us to reimagine what community is. Are you putting an air tag on your child's backpack or their wrist? Or are we going to leverage the support and the power of community, right?
And the importance of what you're doing, I really want to capture this, is because of that pressure. I think there's a lot of us that are willing to think in non-traditional ways to
Yes.
preserve
Yes.
what got us here.
Yes.
Very similar to the 60s in a way. And I was born in 69, so
Right.
but you know, it had gotten to a point where you know, I believe that change happens from within.
Right.
I think you're onto something. Collectively, where we've fell short, and I mean we pejoratively, has been with not being able to mobilize collectively to scale.
Right.
And find our own ways of funding it.
Right. But I'm gonna tell you, Dr. Love, let me tell you what's gonna happen, right? With all this fear of critical race theory, right? Academics and institutions across the country are like pressed about like, what do you mean we can't talk about history, Black history, and tell the truth about it? So here's my prediction. The Black church is gonna be the place where that happens again. You follow me? Right? It's gonna be the place where these conversations that we're having will be again reimagined within that space, right? So curriculum, Black history, Brown history, like all of that, I believe pastors are gonna take over again. And with good reason. And with good reason.
The word that came to mind, and I'll stop so everybody else can talk, but the word that came to my mind is rebirth.
Yes.
Rebirth, a different way to do church.
A different way to do
a different way to do community.
Right.
That has never been done before.
And a different way to do activism in the community.
Yeah, and we and the political pressures around us have forced us. We have no other alternative.
Exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly right. We can't do it in the schools, but we can do it in spaces like this, right?
Yeah.
So it just and we know how to do it. There's a lot of educated, look at all the people on this call, a lot of educated brown people, right? It's not, in some ways, it's about money, but it's not about money. It's more about will, right? And the commitment that we give ourselves to the kids that we love and care about so dearly. And you know, instead of talking about the village, like we really need to be the village. Like your kid is my kid, and my kid is your kid, right? I'm gonna love them the same. I'm gonna educate them the same. Like we need that again. We used to have that. We don't have anymore. Okay, there's somebody, you high for health.
Me?
Did I pronounce that correctly, ma'am?
Yes, you did. You have for health. My name is Jane, and I actually work in that organization, High for Health. We work with African immigrants and refugees.
Yes.
And first, thank you so much for sharing about your son.
Yes.
I'm mother of 2 Black boys, and I also run an organization that we work primarily with African immigrants and refugees.
Yes.
And it's a tough times for moms. I know Kelsey and Emmy knows about it because I talk about it all the time. So I think because of the immigration difficulties and acculturation, a lot of our young people are going through tough times. And as you mentioned that when your son was struggling, or when he went through that event he went through, you had the knowledge and you had the connection for people to help you with that, or to help him. Most of us, they don't have that.
Yes, yes,
Again, what now we've noticed in the community, when our young people are going through difficult time, because we do not have safe spaces for them, they are going into substance use. And
yes, yes,
we also have a lot of stigma in the African community. So we are coming to do intervention when it's too late.
yes.
And my question would be, we don't have that safe space for them, as you've created that model in your organization or at Clark. But for us, we have to first fight the stigma, so even the parents can agree there is a problem and bring them to
Yes,
the safe
yes,
space. So what would be your advice?
yes. So where are you located, Jane? Are you also in Worcester?
In Worcester,
Do you
yes.
know the ACE program?
Yes, I do.
You know Olga?
Olga Valdemania.
Yeah, yeah, she's lovely. So I know they're doing amazing work in the community. Maybe this is a component that also needs to be addressed, because I know she's super committed to parents. We haven't talked about parents per se, just because of the nature of the population I'm working with. I will say we do work with parents, and their voice is critically important, right? And they appreciate the support that we're providing, because even what I've recognized with my own son, we do have a wonderful, close relationship, and he shares with me. He's my only boy. He shares with me. But I also know as a parent, I can't always be there for him. And there are going to be things that he wants to talk about that he doesn't want to talk about with me necessarily. So that's why I was sharing that it's important for the model to include support to parents. So for us to be able to say to parents, this is how we do this thing, right? What might your voice be in this work that we can leverage? So there's alignment sometimes around the message, right? The way that I say it, my son will hear me very differently from what he might hear Dr. Love or Bill say. And that's okay. But overall, we're all working toward the same vision, right? And so sometimes, we as professionals need to get out the ivory tower a little bit and be boots on the ground. That's why I say I'm an applied psychologist. I don't want to talk about the problem unless I'm talking about a solution that's going to go with it, right? I get frustrated around that. And so I think you're right. I think there is absolutely space for parents to be involved. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of how we did this. This is before I came to Clark. Before I came to Clark, you all familiar with Gear Up? Gear Up is a federal program. It's an early college awareness program, right? Long story short, we're working with some 3,000 young people in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Bridgeport is kind of like Worcester, kind of a, underserved community, but on the come up, so to speak. I was doing a study called the Genius of Mothers Study. And at the time, the kids that we were working with in the district were 70% of them were being 65% of the children were being raised by single moms. I saw myself as a part of that population, right? In terms of being a single mom, raising my son too, appreciating the challenges that come with that. And part of what I wanted to learn more about was, what were the formal and informal networks of support that these women relied on to help them nurture their children through toxic school systems, right? Like, what did they do? What were the resources that they themselves creatively came up with to support that, right? And so the way I invited them to be a part of this conversation was, I said, as a part of this early college awareness program, I have to take kids to colleges. Like, I have to show them what different universities look like. So I said, how about you bring your child who's a part of the Gear Up cohort on a weekend college tour out of state. You said your name was Jane? Yes? Miss Jane, listen. So we take these moms on a bus with their kids, and the first day we leave 5 o'clock in the morning. We did it a number of every year for like 5 years. So initially the kids are like, oh, I don't want to be my mom. Like there's all this, right? You know when you hug your child and they don't want to hug you back. So all that going on. By the time they came back, it was just the opposite, right? So the moms got a chance to talk to me and my team about the struggles that they were having with their child, mental health struggles. But while they were doing that, they also had 4 days of respite. They're staying in hotels, they're going swimming, they're seeing cultural events, they're visiting colleges. By the time we came back, those same parents, understanding what the broader vision was for their children, came together. They started a Facebook parent page. They taped all the trainings that we did for parents to make sure other parents had that information about the FAFSA, college entrance, They organized around creating a 5K walk run to raise money for scholarships for their kids, right? And so the point I'm making, every one of those kids got a scholarship by the time they graduated school because parents became invested. It didn't cost me, it cost me money to take them for 3 days, but the return on investment for me as a program was far more than that because parents got, here's what we're after, right? And it didn't matter if their kid wanted to go to college or a trade program, which is fine too. But the idea was they created a community, they came together and they said, we can do this ourselves. That didn't cost me a dime, Jane. So that's what I'm saying, like that's the part that we have to get back to where we create spaces and opportunities for parents too, right? To learn about ways in which we can support children and understand, their behavior and how they cope with stress, sometimes with the use of substances and kind of risky behavior, as we call it, but to provide that opportunity for them to connect with us on their terms and their space, right? Right. It's kind of like this whole thing, like kids don't want to, like parents don't want to come to the hospital, right? It's got all sorts of stigma and connotation wrapped around that. But if you create an opportunity for them to actually spend quality time with their kid, ask the questions they need to ask. Because, on the college tour, the kids care about the cafeteria. They don't care about how much it costs to get in and, the tuition, like all the stuff that parents care about. So bridging those gaps, I have found in my experience has been really, really powerful and the opportunity to affect change with kids and families.
Thank you.
I saw some other hands up. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to your short question, Ms. Jane. Anybody working with young men of color right now other than Mr. Bill and Dr. Love? And if so, tell me some of the things that you are encountering in the work. Thank you, Joyce. Jeffrey Wright, where's Mr. Wright? Alessandra has also raised her hand. Mr. Wright, just speak. I don't know where you are. Okay, how about Alessandra while Mr. Wright is unmuting himself?
So my name is Alessandra Nicholson, and I run a sterile processing certification course. And I've been working in that field for about 16 years, which is how I got out to Worcester. That's why I caught my eye when I saw it, because I worked out there in travel healthcare at UMass for a while. But specifically with Black men, I encountered them when they come in as students into the certificate program. And it's really changed the way I do my work, because before I was just doing certification prep, just talking about what was in the technical manual. But going through the process of getting them certified and getting them into healthcare positions, I ran into all kind of social problems that they really didn't have other places to go ask for help with. So I really love that you guys are having a conversation about substance abuse, because that was one of the more common ones as far as marijuana and alcohol, and having them be able to because you have to get drug tested to work in healthcare.
Yes,
So
yes.
for them, if their coping mechanism is marijuana, that's going to be a financial barrier to them to be able to use their certificates. I
Yes.
also had some issues helping people that were had the felon status
Mm-hmm.
be able to work in that healthcare space, break those barriers for them, but not just from actually getting hired, but working on the floor as a Black man in a hospital. You're going to be dealing with a lot of social issues that you can't necessarily run to your management teams about. You don't necessarily get a lot of support. So I found myself kind of trying to create mental health pamphlets and handouts for them. It felt like a small kind of trifling thing to do, but to try to help them to be able to manage their stress themselves, because there really isn't a space for them to go to inside of the healthcare system. And
Alexandra, that's
go ahead.
so first of all, let me just say, I just applaud you for that work, right? You're doing some amazing work. And I think, you know, just to underscore your efforts, this is why those exposure experiences are so important. I mean, you all have heard, the concept of code switching and what have you. And I think sometimes, you know, we work together to create new opportunities in terms of workforce development programs that provide, like the population that we're talking about today, these young men of color, the opportunity to grow, right? Right? To have these better career advancement opportunities, to generate a living wage where they can actually take care of themselves and their families. But where we often fall short is we don't provide enough of the scaffolding and have the, I'm going to say, for lack of a better word, the spaces to talk about in their transition into these new spaces, addressing the cultural differences, right? And addressing how they will be perceived. So young people today often are saying, like, how they love to do this, like, I'm me, like they're unique and they're different and they're special, and they show up. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where they can show and be themselves no matter what spaces they find themselves in,
Oh,
right? Wouldn't that be
absolutely.
wonderful? But when you're working in that hospital, right?
You cannot.
Just what?
I
There's
coached
all
I coached
sorts
a
of
young man that had transferred here from St. Lucia,
yes,
and he spent 10 years with his dreadlocks wrapped up into a bun and under a cap.
yes,
And to the point where nobody actually knew that he had dreadlocks long enough to go down to his knees. And when I asked him, why do you cover your hair? It's so beautiful. And he said, because I'm a St. Lucian immigrant. I don't want to be associated as a Jamaican that only gets high all day. I want to be seen as a professional in this space. When I tell you it broke something in my heart to
you
know
got
that
it.
he has to spend energy during his day thinking about the way that other people perceive his natural beauty in
Yep,
order to be seen as a professional.
yep, exactly right. And then you're creating space for him to be able to have that conversation with you is so critical, right? And
Yes, and
understanding the
so
microaggressions that he probably experiences every day, right?
my question to you all, because I'm not a college graduate. I went through a certificate process and I've worked in the healthcare field and I worked in management. But because of my lane, I didn't really have to run into becoming bachelored yet. I'm working on that now. But so all the work that I do is just me doing this work. And I see all of these different organizations on here, and I see you guys are doing this out of universities. Do you have any tools or places that I can connect with to bring more, I want to say maybe like more established resources to these folks?
Yeah. That's a question for Amy and Kelsey, I think.
I say Amy, connect with Amy. She has
She
all of
knows
the
them.
tools. Connect with Amy. She'll connect you with all of us, and you'll be in a space where somebody here can
Can help you.
can help you.
Yeah.
And I love
Thank
that you brought that up, right? College isn't for everyone, but support and community is for everyone and needs to be
Absolutely.
for for everyone. So we definitely want to be your ally in creating as many intentional spaces that give access to people, to professionals, to people that are doing work they might want to do, to places where they can talk about what's really going on. And yeah, this is a scary time that we have to be worried about what we even are talking about right now. But that is the reality of the time we're in, and makes it even more important that we come together in community. That's the only thing that actually helps.
Absolutely.
And in addition to connecting with Amy, I saw a few resources in the chat. ddcry.org, Brothers Let's Talk, and Doc Wayne were all shared in the chat for gentlemen who may be a little older. I know that we're running short on time, so folks, we understand if you have to jump at 1:30, but I saw a hand raised by Miss Grace and then by Mr. Jeffrey.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Wright might have been ahead of me, so I know people are eager to speak. I'll just talk briefly to that question about what we do and if we work with young Black men. So I work as a staff attorney with Health Law Advocates for their mental health advocacy for kids program. And I think it's less where I see it, and also I'm a mother of a young black emerging man, so who's a teenager. So it's navigating the societal and class systems, the microaggressions, the stereotypes, wanting to build confidence for your child while really instilling in them what is going on, the reality of the world we're living in. And so I think it's somewhat of a balancing act. And I really loved the getting back to our roots where we came from, having that support, the village mentality versus the relying on Apple and the AirTag. And I won't say, I had to say ouch for a moment because I have utilized technology to find my child. But I think going back to those sources that have nurtured and supported us and got us to where we are today is really critical. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to go back in some cases to what has worked and really acknowledge that and appreciate it for what it is, not try and do something else. So it's a combination, but I wanted to say how important this presentation is, and I was looking forward to it and look forward to just learning more about it. And I love the idea of the model that you have established at Clark being instituted in, established in like elementary, middle, high school. I love that. So thank you again. Thank you again. I'll pass it
Thank
off
you.
to Mr. Wright.
Yes, please.
Hi, Dr. Ward. Thank you so much. Are you hearing me?
We can hear you, yes.
Awesome. Thank you again for putting this presentation together. It brought some sense of hope to me and life back inside of me, because honestly, I am drained with the atmosphere around young Black men and Black men in general, Black people overall. My question to you is very simple, very short. What would you say to me to share with my other Black brothers and sisters that has given up hope, that don't have the passion in holding on as I do, and they're just over and done with it? What would you say to them? What can you say to me to say to them?
Well, I would say that, you come from a lineage and an experience where people have constantly overcome. So you have within you the ability to withstand the challenges that perhaps you're facing right now. The question becomes, how do we get you connected to someone that can hold you in a space for you to be able to share and talk about what those concerns that you might have, and then offer opportunities for you to begin to address those in a proactive way. I will also share with you, Jeffrey, the other thing that I have found is that for young people who often find themselves in real pain, the opportunity to give back to somebody else, to help somebody else, helps them through the challenges that they are experiencing, right? And so if there are, you know, places, spaces that are important to you, where you feel like you've got something to contribute, I would absolutely seek those spaces out and figure out a way for you to derive your own healing through supporting and healing someone else. But the first place is to kind of find someone that you can connect to really talk about where you're at.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's sometimes the short questions are the hardest ones, right? They're always the hardest ones. How are we doing on time? Amy, Letitia, Kelsey?
We still have time. We are ready to go till 2 o'clock. So if people
Okay.
have,
All right.
if you can, but if people have questions or even comments, things that you want to share, I'm so grateful for all the things that are coming up and in the ways that people are hopefully just forming connections with each other today. That is, like you said, those are the beautiful outcomes when you can leave with like, now you know another person who cares about this. Amazing. And there's Kathy. She's got her hand up and she's ready to go.
Hi, Kathy.
So I really love this dialogue. It's very great. Great. I work in the juvenile justice system, and I'm curious how this model could be applied to those youth where, you know, they're making really good connections and making them consistently so. And one of the programs I brought in Judge Leslie Harris, and the kids were flying off the wall. They were so inspired. But how do we make sure they're consistently connected to really powerful Black men and Black women, and people of other races too? How do we give them this quality and safe places to share? And then also, what you said about the last piece was really powerful. How do we make sure that they have a chance to help others? Because there's something that happens when you help others, and when you are like, when you we really over incarcerate Black men, and we do it for very concerning reasons. And how do we say you're more than just a label criminal, and more than just a label, and your life. This isn't one of the things I would say to them is this moment doesn't define your life. You can be so much more than that. I used a lot of Black pride, Black history stuff with some of my youth because I really felt they needed to be built up and know that the over incarceration we have now is only a piece of who Black people are. There's also greatness in that. So how do we let them know their greatness as a race, race or ethnicity? How do we give them mentors that are powerful mentors? And then, how do we do that? And then also, while we're also, like, one of the things I try to always acknowledge is they live in a racist society. So in a different program, I work with junior high youth, and I would say, you're a young Black person living in the society. How's that been like for you? And you would get these stories. I would wait till like the third session before I, as a white woman, asked that question. But I guess, how do we make sure that we include incarcerated youth in this and give them this too? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, that I actually have not. Is that true? I got to go back a couple years, Kathy. Early in my career, I never worked in a juvenile detention centers per se, but I worked in an adult education facility that served young men who were in juvenile detention facility, right? And so again, you're talking about a systems issue, right? Absolutely. You're talking about a systems issue. And so I'm gonna tell you how we did it. I don't know if we can do it in Worcester, but this is how we did it. So what happened was in New Haven, this was probably in the early 2000s. Is that right? So this is like, I'm going back 25 years now, 24 years now. 700 kids in New Haven disappeared from the school system. 700 Black and brown kids disappeared from the school system. And the superintendent of New Haven Public Schools at the time was a man by the name of Reggie Mayo, Black man. And the head of the lead mental health authority was another Black man. His name was Ezra Griffith, who is my mentor to this day. Ezra, if he ain't 85 years old, he's not a day. So he's amazing. And so the two of these men got together and said, where are all these Black kids? Primarily boys, right? And so they figured out a way to pool state resources and education. So Department of Education, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, they pulled together resources. They opened up this school that started, Kathy, in the basement of a church, Beulah Heights Baptist Church in New Haven. At the time, I had just completed graduate school. I'm in this, program, and like honestly, what do I know? Like right out of school, like you read a lot of books and stuff, you write some papers and dissertation, but you don't know anything really. So here we are with this big problem, and the goal that we had, and I was one of 15 social service agencies that came together to figure out how to deal with this problem. And so those agencies were workforce development. There was a primary health component. There was a legal component. We had an attorney on that team. There was a case manager. There was a vocational counselor. There was a social worker. There were educators. We all were in one big room in this, and we transitioned to an actual physical space in this alternative education center, most of whom these kids had a whole lot of challenges and problems, et cetera, but some of them were also very much engaged in juvenile justice. And so it was a community, we called ourselves the Community Support Services Team. And so we all got together and we, with our own areas of expertise, put together comprehensive programming to address the needs of the population and their families, right? So back then, psychologists, they didn't do home visits, right? They don't do it now, but back then it was my job to actually do home visits. And so, and we went together, like I would go with the case manager, run around trying to find kids across New Haven Public, the city and what have you. And it was so rich because you got to see exactly what was going on and the kinds of challenges that they were faced with every single day. And so it was the coordination of those comprehensive services that came together. So, we were doing with the teachers at the school, programming around Black history and understanding and valuing who you are and where you come from, right? We were talking to them about substance use and the pitfalls around that, triggers for using it. We were talking to them about their future orientation, where they thought they could and wanted to go, right? And I have not actually seen, I haven't been here in Worcester too long, y'all would tell me on this call differently, where something like that exists. But what we found is that if you have the opportunity to coordinate care, right, wraparound services in a way that is culturally responsive to the population that you're serving, you can do these things, right? So yeah, we were working with the major drug dealers in the city. They were kids, and they would say to me, if you were to see me, Kathy, I'm about 5'4", I'm real short, and these kids were towering over me, and they'd say, Dr. Ward, and I was newly minted Dr. Ward. I was making $13,000 a year, Kathy, at that time. 13,000. They took advantage of us as students, whatever. But the kids would say, Dr. Ward, I'm making $70,000 a week, right? And I'd say, But how do you sleep at night? I sleep fairly well. If I'm upset, because I'm worried about y'all, right? I can't sleep because I'm worried about you. But let's talk about, so we would have these critical conversations about the decisions they were making moment to moment in their lives. But I had the support of all these other organizations that brought with them, their unique talents, skills, abilities to wrap around these kids in a way that made a difference. So it'd be great if we could do something more like that. If it doesn't exist here in Worcester, I think we should have that conversation and figure it out.
There are some good programs that do that work, but it needs to be more of it. There needs to be
More
more
of it,
and I
more
mean,
comprehensive.
yeah, and I just, yeah, I mean, there is definitely, I don't want to dismiss what's already being done because it's incredible work,
Yes,
but even
yes.
more, and I love the fact that your program just absolutely says you guys are designing it, you guys are presenting it. That's to me that if youth who are incarcerated got that, that would feed their soul in a way
Yeah,
that is just
yeah,
amazing. But thank
yeah.
you for your reply. Thank you.
Thank you so
Other
much.
people.
Yeah, I think I saw another hand up. Nathaniel Lopez. Where's Nathaniel at? There he is.
Hi, how y'all doing?
We're good.
I
How
just
are
wanted
you?
to thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for the great presentation, and everyone here have contributed so much. I could have helped myself to just jump into this conversation as well and contribute just because so many great people are on this room. And I just want to make sure that to let everyone know that y'all doing amazing work and great work is happening. But first and foremost, let me introduce myself. My name is Nathaniel Lopez. I work at an after-school college access program called Dynamite John S. Laws Academy. Also a from Worcester, an alumni of Clark University as well. Um, and yeah, shout out to Cougars. But I just wanted to just talk about a little bit towards your model of healing. And so I just want to talk about the components of it a little bit. Uh, just community, identity, healing, and
Yes,
mentoring.
yes, yes.
I just really resonated with that model of healing because within our program, um, none of our team members are clinicians. However, we still can provide that. And it just shows, and don't get me wrong, clinicians are very important. And I believe that young Black males and also other POCs should also seek them if needed. However, I do want to share that by providing a safe place can be a really great thing as well. Within our program, we do talk a lot about identity and road mapping, and the intersectionality of it is beautiful because we do serve first generation students of color. So, being a young Black male and intersectionality of being a young Black male, being first generation, can cause a lot of questions, can cause a lot of confusion, and very happy that within our program, we do provide something like advisance, whereas one-on-one mentoring where we meet up and we dedicate 45 to a whole hour at times talking with these students individually, meeting them where they're at, hearing their stories, and then also seeing what we can do as advisors to support them. Um, I think I just really wanted to highlight the fact that a great step is just continue providing these safe environments for our young Black males and other people of color, students of color. I believe that it's very important to do so. And the intentionality, the same way I believe, so sorry, I can't think who said it earlier, but the intentionality that you put into this presentation is the same level of intentionality that we should all do within our lines of work. And students do see that. Students do see because they go through the motions every day through school, through other adults in their life. But when they see through and through, if you are sitting there with intentionality and willing to be there with them, it does create that safe environment, which can also help with that. Just which bringing it back to your model of healing, I believe that those four categories all encapsulates just providing the safe environment in order to work on community, in order to work on identity, healing, and also mentoring. That's definitely the first step of everything.
Yeah.
Once again, I definitely just wanted to share that we're a program out here in Worcester as well. But I couldn't help put just to contribute into this
I'm
dialogue, just because it was so good.
I'm so glad you jumped in there, Mr. Lopez. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I think it's
Thank you.
powerful. You're doing some powerful work, and here's what I love. And like you're super young too, right? I'm not gonna take a guess on how old you are, but you're a Clark alum and all of that. But the other thing that's really, really beautiful is like what I've realized is that you never really know the impact that your words have on a young person in a moment. And so I've lived long enough now that now when I encounter young people that I've worked with years ago, and they'll come up to me and they say, Dr. Ward, you said blah, blah, blah. And I always cringe because I'm like, oh, like, what did I say? Like, hopefully I said the right thing. But the point is that, whenever you touch a young person's heart, that you live within them, right? Like they carry a little piece of you with them along their journey, right? And I think that is so powerful. So, to your point, being intentional about, and I will say this too, and I'm so glad Kathy asked me the question about like, how did we do this work before? You know, it's absolutely kind of thinking about who you are in the multiple spaces that you find yourself in. For example, what was powerful at that school that we were working in many years ago was, the African American history teacher, Mr. Kerm Carolina. We were about the same age when we started this work. He was teaching African American history in the classroom. The district had this new ruling that said you can't teach unless you have a license. And he was in the middle of getting that. He wasn't quite finished. So they said, you can't teach. So they pulled him out of the classroom, Nathaniel, and they put him in school suspension, right? If you can imagine. So what happened, Nathaniel? The kids purposely got in trouble to get put in school suspension so they could be with Mr. Carolina, who was teaching them African Americans, right? And then they saw Mr. Carolina because he lived in the community. They saw him at Stop and Shop. They saw him at church. They saw him at, community events, what have you. So it was almost like he was a pillar of the community. And no matter where they encountered him, he was consistent, Nathaniel, right? He remembered your name. He remembered the things you liked, right? If you had a challenge, you knew you could go to him. And so that's part of like the community building piece that you're talking about, like being intentional about yourself as a pride. He wasn't a clinician. He didn't have a Ph.D. in psychology, but kids sought him out because when they were in his space, they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt valued. You follow what I'm saying? They felt like, that they meant something, and he engendered that in them, right? And so I'm always talking to the young people that I train in this work to say, everybody needs those things. Everybody needs to be seen, heard, valued, and beloved. And if you can get there, the programming, yeah, you got to have some thinking about that. But if you concentrate on those things and those exposure experiences, those kids are going to carry you with them through their life, right?
Absolutely. And like just a real quick tidbit, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's why within our program, despite we are a college access program, we have a lot of amazing workshops and a lot of prep for our students and set them for success. I believe that is the advisings, those one-on-ones, that intentionality, it is the
Yes.
foundation that does grasp the scholars and be like, you know what? These advisors really do care. And that is the threshold, and that's what brings them into programming, because we can't just like set up some dates and be like, all right, guys, like come in. No, we have to put that first step. We have to meet them halfway. And a lot of the
Absolutely.
time, some professionals won't make that initiative, that handout. However, it's very important to know that representation is very, very important. And I think that not think I that's why I know I love what I do right now. Just because I serve the same students that I relate to. And a lot of times I think, like you said earlier, that I have like I'm a little bit youthful. And a matter of fact, I believe a lot of times that's actually towards my advantage as well, because I work with this youth from Worcester, and they're just like, yes, like I resonate to that. I resonate with you, Nate. I understand that. And I'm yapping right now, but I definitely just want to talk about how that intentionality, that like advising is the foundation, that connection. And like you said, then the program will go along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please keep doing what you're doing. I'm so excited about the ways in which you're touching young people in their lives. Please keep doing that. I love it. Saeed,
Sayed,
Saidi, Sayed,
Sayed, no worries.
Sayed. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to actually piggyback on what you were saying about the what someone would remember what they said, even if you don't intend them to. So I always brag about my husband, who is a special ed teacher and was the one of the first Black teachers in the middle school where he works at. And even though he's a special ed teacher for kids with severe disabilities, he wanted to coach the soccer team, and he included mostly kids who have who are in IEPs or 504s for social, emotional, and behavioral issues. And ever since he started that 3 years ago, he's the most popular teacher in school. And now that kids are even in high school, they just know him. He's just known across the district for just being himself. And then allowing kids to be themselves and see themselves in somebody who is older than them, who understands where they're coming from, despite of not necessarily being a person that they talk to a lot, but know somehow that they can go to him
Absolutely.
whenever that is needed. So I myself, I'm in training for counseling, and I look forward to work with kids mostly. And it is just one of those things, like Nathaniel said, of being able to work with people that we can relate to closely. It's really rewarding as much as it can be cumbersome. I think someone mentioned that they're a supervisor for therapists of color, and that is the challenge, being able to keep up with keeping up, I suppose. And I appreciate, I'm sorry that I actually missed most of the actually all of the presentation, but love the conversation. And I just want to leave Amy with homework of, we really do need to coordinate. It's coordination is key in this space, and we have the resources are out there. I will like to point out how difficult it is for kids to even participate in sports in school because of financial transportation barriers that not a lot of us can think about. But when you have a kid, you will know. I don't have a kid, and I'm sorry that I know. And it breaks my heart that that very simple things sometimes can really prevent people from participating within the community in things that would benefit them. And we can find a way, as difficult as things are at this time, for sure. So thank you
Well,
for the work
I
you're doing.
love your comment. We need to clone your husband, like for sure, and everybody else. And I will say, like, the other thing that we haven't touched, and I see Aaliyah's hands is up as well. We're gonna get to her before we jump off here. So a lot of us engage in this work, like it's a calling, right? I will tell you, as a parent, one of my biggest fears raising my son when he was a little person in grade school, I was always that parent was like, you know, working in some school district, some school, some community organization, and then flying in my car to get to him to pick him up after school, right? And like, oh my, Tim, I'm so sorry, Mom was like, and my biggest fear, Saidi, was like, I would say, is he gonna grow up thinking mom cares about everybody else's kids but me? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I was the parent getting there late, blah, 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 blah. The
I'm
good
a
news.
child of teachers, so I completely understand what
You
you're
okay?
saying.
You understand what I'm saying, right? And so that was a big fear. Now, fortunately, I was fortunate in that he actually went to school to become. He was a psych major, and he was actually working in a residential psychiatric treatment facility as a counselor. So something good from all of that came out of it, because he feels like, as a young Black man, he wants to give back to kids and have a similar kind of experience. So I say that to share, we got to take care of ourselves as well, because what we do isn't necessarily the 9 to 5 thing. Because, kids, when they come to you, they reach out to you, it like when they really want to talk, it ain't gonna be in between 9 and 5. It might be 10 o'clock. It might, you know what I mean? You never know what the crisis is, but you have to be available. So I say that to share, we also have to take care of each other in this work because sometimes it can deplete you emotionally and your ability to give and be present, to be really present to the young people that we're serving. Absolutely. Aaliyah, how about will you please share? Thank you, dear.
Thank you. First, I want to just thank Amy. My name is Alia Bannister Beatty. I serve as Wayside's Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of Legislative and External Affairs. And I just moved here from Chicago in September. So it's been an interesting adjustment, to say the least. A lot of the things you talked about as far as wraparound services and things like that, I'm very familiar with organizations in Chicago that's already doing it. But just looking through, and I hate to say this, the legislative lens, because that's where I look at things. I really am curious as to how we can, uplift our young African American males and just Black and brown males and females overall as we go into this new legislative landscape. It's one thing I have to mention is what you just said really hit me very strong before I started. Because I am a person that's always been into social justice. I've worked for Congressman Rush, who, if people know, he was a former Black Panther that then became a congressman. I worked for him for 2 years in DC, things like that. But I say that to say, like, I'm always a person. Now I have my own child who's 12, but I'm always like, how can we fight? How can we fight? How can we fight? And I sometimes forget about self-care. So I appreciate what you stated, especially now because as they say, my radio is up because I'm like, how can we prepare our Black and brown youth for this new political landscape? And because I'm looking at it from a legislative lens and understanding that a lot of the legislation and the rescinding of a lot of the executive orders are not just around immigration, but they're around civil liberty protections. So what that means is stop and frisk is back in full effect. The police accountability databases that were put in place by former presidents will no longer exist. And so for individuals who grew up in that era where police had no accountability, what you did, I grew up in in inner city Chicago, what you did in those cities and the way they harass the youth, my own self, it was very real. It was no recourse. And so I'm very worried. And I just wanted to ask even and have this conversation with all of you as, therapists and individuals in this work. How can people like myself prepare the youth? I've been passing out red cards and educating people about their legislative rights, but I'm like, how can we prepare them? Because as we sit here and talk about the past trauma, it's going to be some new significant trauma that comes out with this. And I know I said a lot, so I apologize, and I'm in an Uber, but I just had to ask the question.
I'm so glad. Yeah. Yeah, we can open that up to the floor. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that was a little bit of what Dr. Luff was getting at too, which is, how do we come together as community? We got to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to figure out a way to have self-reliance.
Yes.
And what we are talking about now and what we have overcome as a people in the past, when we think about what we went through during civil rights and Reconstruction, all of that, like, it's not like we don't know how to do it, right?
Yes, we do.
We know how to do it.
We definitely do.
It's gonna require, so it's almost like we have to be kind of working at all cylinders. Like, we absolutely need you at State House, still fighting the fight. Like, we can't give up on that, right? We still got to do that. But we also have to convene our allies and folks who feel passionately about this topic and say, you know what? Yeah, it's 7 o'clock. I'm getting off of work, but I gotta go to the community center because we're doing this training of young people like Nathaniel over here, on talking about social justice, the important, whatever it is, right? Like, it's gonna require the above and beyond, I think, at some level, because I think you're right. I think that we have to anticipate the re-traumatizing of our
Mhm.
youth that is coming.
Yeah.
Have to
And
anticipate.
that's what I'm very worried about. I know people say we know how to do it, and I understand that and agree, but I'm like, I know that my parents know how to do it, or I know how to do it because it's been taught. So when we say like fight, for us, we understand that the bus boycotts were 18 months. But for people who've never been taught that,
Yes.
when you say
Yes.
fight, they don't know what tools they have
Right.
to even get in the fight. You understand
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
And that's
Right.
why I'm like, how can we prepare our youth? Is it education? And, given that they are already experiencing trauma, will they be open to that? You know what I mean?
And how do you mobilize, right? And how do we model for them what the fight looks like, right? Especially in a time where sometimes our youth, they don't know their history, right? Like they need to, like they
That's
need.
exactly what I'm saying. Thank you, Dr. Ward.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Well, I think Amy, Kelsey, and folks on this call, it feels to me like there's going to be more conversation. I love that you all have this every Tuesday, but it sounds like there's enough.
Only once a month, sorry, but we would love to have you back. There is no doubt that there's so much more to talk
To
about,
unpack. Yeah.
and we could keep on going. And right, like, and everything you said really relates so much to trauma. It's about building community, personal resilience, but community resilience. And so many people shared how powerful it was to just be in a space where we're talking about it. That is what the threat is these days, is they're closing down any spaces to even have these conversations. So we got to just keep doing it, because it really is what's going to bolster us and get us through this. But like, none of us are getting through this alone. We have to do it together, and white people have to be a part of it. There's a place for everyone, to create something that hasn't been before, that's going to get us through this time of challenge that feels so heavy. And just so grateful to everyone here, and especially to you, Dr. Ward, for the work that you're doing, that you're continuing to do, because we needed this. We really needed this.
Thank you for having me. And I am so excited to have been a part of this conversation. I hope we continue to have the conversation. You all, if you want to convene anything here at Clark, I'm happy to facilitate that. I would love to convene young people coming together, and for us to be there as the village, to wrap our arms around them, to facilitate and as a show of love and support of them. Happy to do that too. So you all let me know when we're going to do it, when we're going to get together again. I would love it.
Awesome.
I would
Thank you
love
all
it.
so
Thank
much.
you so much for the conversation. I look forward to getting to know you all in the community. Come by the Institute anytime. We do snacks, and we do tea, and we do coffee as well. So join us whenever you can.
Thank you. That's a beautiful invitation. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one. Talk soon, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.